Arthur Blake was the kind of man who never liked to fuss about his health. At 71, he had always seen himself as a steady ship sailing calmly through the seasons of life. He was a retired literature teacher, fond of quiet mornings with the newspaper, black coffee, and the occasional stroll around his small garden. But one autumn morning, while visiting his daughter's family, something changed. He found himself standing in the kitchen, unable to recall the name of the neighbor he'd just waved to a moment earlier. It wasn't just a slip, it was a strange, hollow pause that unsettled him. His daughter, Emily, noticed the flicker of confusion on his face, but neither of them said much. Still, the seed of worry had been planted. Over the next few weeks, Arthur began noticing other small lapses, misplacing his reading glasses twice in an afternoon, struggling to remember where he'd parked his car, losing his train of thought mid-sentence. They were subtle moments, easy to shrug off, yet they left him uneasy. At night, lying in bed, he would replay the day in his mind, wondering if these were simply the normal quirks of aging or something more. The thought of his own father, who had battled memory loss in his late 70s, cast a shadow over him. He began to feel the weight of time in ways he hadn't before. One crisp Saturday morning, Arthur decided to visit his longtime physician, Dr. Nathan, a calm and thoughtful man in his early 60s who had known Arthur for decades. After listening to Arthur describe his concerns, Dr. Nathan leaned back in his chair and spoke with a gentle seriousness. "Arthur," he said, "memory changes can happen as we age, but we can influence the pace. Your brain health is like a garden. It needs the right conditions to thrive." He explained how oxidative stress, poor circulation, and nutrient deficiencies could quietly erode memory over the years. And then, with a small smile, he mentioned something unexpected. Blueberries. Blueberries? Arthur had enjoyed them from time to time in pancakes or muffins, but never thought of them as anything more than a sweet treat. Dr. Nathan described them as nature's brain berries, packed with anthocyanins, those deep blue pigments that act as powerful antioxidants, protecting delicate brain cells from damage. He explained how they could improve blood flow to the brain, reduce inflammation, and even help the mind stay sharp well into old age. It was a simple suggestion, but the way Dr. Nathan spoke made it feel like a small key to a much larger door. That afternoon, Arthur stopped by the farmer's market. The blueberries sat there in small wooden baskets, their skins glistening in the sunlight. He bought 3 baskets, not entirely sure why, but somehow it felt like he was taking the first step on a path he hadn't realized he needed. At home, he rinsed them carefully, poured them into a small porcelain bowl, and ate them slowly, one by one. Their sweet, tart burst felt refreshing, almost cleansing, as if each berry carried a little spark of vitality. Over the next several weeks, Arthur began making blueberries a part of his daily routine. He'd add them to his morning oatmeal, blend them into a smoothie, or simply eat a handful in the afternoon while reading. At first, he wasn't sure if he felt any different. But then, one chilly December morning, while chatting with his neighbor in the garden, he noticed something. He could recall the man's name without hesitation, along with the name of his wife, and even the book they'd discussed months ago. It was a small victory, but one that filled him with quiet joy. Yet, as Arthur shared his new blueberry habit with friends, one of them mentioned offhandedly, "I put mine in milk every morning with cereal. So good." Arthur thought nothing of it at first, until a few days later when Dr. Nathan gently cautioned him, "Be careful what you pair them with, Arthur. Some combinations can undo the benefits." It was a curious idea, but Dr. Nathan explained that certain foods could block the absorption of the very antioxidants that made blueberries so valuable. He spoke of how pairing them with cow's milk could bind to those compounds, making them harder for the body to use, or how other combinations could disrupt digestion or degrade key vitamins. This was a turning point for Arthur. He realized that eating well wasn't only about what you ate, it was also about how you combined foods, how you timed them, and how you allowed your body to make the most of what you gave it. The thought that he might be unknowingly wasting the benefits of his daily blueberries gave him pause. He didn't want to lose momentum now that he felt he was moving in the right direction. So Arthur began to pay closer attention. He replaced cow's milk with almond milk in his cereal, kept cucumbers and blueberries apart in his fruit salads, and made sure not to pair blueberries with pineapple at breakfast. At first, it felt like a small inconvenience, but soon it became second nature. He began experimenting with new pairings, bananas for extra potassium, Greek yogurt for protein and probiotics, walnuts for brain-boosting omega-3s. His morning routine became a quiet ritual of care, a moment each day where he felt in control of his own well-being. As winter turned to spring, Arthur noticed more changes. His afternoon energy slumps became less frequent. His skin seemed a little brighter, his mood steadier. He still had the occasional memory lapse. No miracle could erase age entirely. But there was a lightness to his days that he hadn't felt in years. Emily noticed too. "Dad," she said one afternoon over tea, "you just seem sharper lately, happier even." Arthur smiled, thinking of his small porcelain bowl of blueberries and the way such a modest habit could ripple through his life in unexpected ways. He realized that while blueberries had been the catalyst, the deeper change was his renewed attentiveness to his own health. In paying attention to how he nourished himself, he had begun to feel not just like a man trying to hold back the tide of aging, but like someone steering his ship again. The fear he'd felt that autumn morning in the kitchen hadn't disappeared entirely, but it no longer held the same power over him. Instead, he felt a growing sense of trust in his choices, in his resilience, in the small, daily acts that quietly shape the quality of life. And so, Arthur's story isn't just about a fruit, it's about the moment you decide to care a little more, to listen to your body's whispers before they become shouts, to choose foods that don't just fill you but truly serve you. It's about learning that sometimes the key to aging well isn't found in complicated regimens or expensive treatments, but in something as simple as a handful of blueberries, chosen wisely, eaten mindfully, and paired with the right companions. Because as Arthur would come to understand, it's not just what you eat, but how you honor it that makes all the difference. Arthur Blake had always thought of berries as something you sprinkled on a summer dessert or stirred into yogurt on a whim. He never considered them to be a serious part of his diet, just pleasant little bursts of sweetness that made breakfast feel a bit fancier. But after his conversation with Dr. Nathan that crisp Saturday morning, blueberries began to take on a different shape in his mind. They weren't just a fruit anymore, they were a kind of promise, a small, quiet promise that maybe, just maybe, he could hold on to his memory, his clarity, his independence a little longer. That first week, Arthur decided to start simple. No complicated recipes, no elaborate routines. Just a small porcelain bowl of blueberries each morning, placed neatly on the kitchen table beside his coffee mug and folded newspaper. He liked the ritual of it, the gentle rinse under cool water, the soft clink as they rolled into the bowl, the rich purplish blue that seemed to catch the morning light. The act itself felt calming, a pause before the day began. Emily would sometimes drop by to check on him, and she noticed the change immediately. "Dad," she said one morning with a smile, "I've never seen you eat breakfast so mindfully." At first, Arthur didn't expect to feel anything different. After all, they were just berries. But by the second week, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic, no sudden burst of energy or miraculous memory surge. Instead, it was subtle, like a fog lifting just enough to see the outline of a familiar path. He found himself recalling little details more easily, the punchline of a joke from a book club friend, the name of the shopkeeper he chatted with in town, the exact time he'd scheduled his next checkup. These were things he might have stumbled over a month ago, but now they came back to him with surprising ease. One afternoon, while pruning the rose bushes in his garden, Arthur realized he was humming a tune he hadn't thought about in years. He couldn't remember the last time he'd sung without meaning to. It made him chuckle under his breath. He thought about how Dr. Nathan had compared brain health to a garden, needing care and nourishment to thrive. "Well," Arthur said to himself as he clipped a stubborn branch, "I suppose I'm feeding mine now." It was a small moment, but it filled him with quiet satisfaction. His daughter Emily noticed the change in his mood before Arthur did. She commented on how he seemed more upbeat, less distracted, more present in their conversations. They laughed more during their weekly lunches, often sharing stories from the past. Arthur began to realize that the berries weren't just affecting his memory, they were influencing how he felt about the day ahead. It was as if the act of starting his morning with something so intentionally healthy gave him a sense of control, a way to push back against the creeping worries about aging. But it wasn't all perfect. There were mornings when Arthur forgot to buy fresh blueberries, and the routine broke. On those days, he noticed he felt just a little less anchored, as if the absence of that small habit threw off his rhythm. It surprised him how quickly he had come to depend on it, not just for the possible brain benefits, but for the comfort it brought. That was when he decided he would always keep a small bag of frozen blueberries in the freezer, just in case. They weren't quite the same as the fresh ones from the market, but they were good enough to keep the ritual alive. As winter deepened, Arthur began to see the blueberries as more than a food choice. They became a kind of symbol. Every handful he ate was a quiet statement to himself. I am still here. I still care. I am still looking forward. It reminded him of how his mother used to start her mornings with a cup of hot tea and a slice of toast with marmalade, always telling him, "It's not just breakfast, Arthur, it's a promise you make to yourself for the day." Now, decades later, he understood what she meant. He shared his new blueberry habit with a few friends at the community center. Most of them nodded politely, but one woman, Margaret, leaned in with interest. "I've been eating blueberries for years," she said. "Started after my husband's doctor recommended them for his memory. He swore they kept him sharper than most of the fellas his age." Hearing her say that made Arthur smile in a way he hadn't expected. It was comforting to know he wasn't alone in this quiet act of defiance against time. On particularly cold mornings, Arthur would warm a small pot of oatmeal and stir the blueberries in just before taking it off the stove. He liked how they softened, bleeding their deep purple into the creamy oats. Sometimes he'd drizzle a little honey over the top, not because he needed the sweetness, but because it made the meal feel like a treat. Each bite felt like an affirmation, nourishing not just his body, but his determination to age on his own terms. Dr. Nathan, during a follow-up visit, asked Arthur how things were going. Arthur described the small improvements he'd noticed, the clearer recall, the steadier mood, the little sparks of joy in his day. Dr. Nathan listened with that calm, approving smile of his. "It's the small habits, Arthur," he said, "the ones you keep showing up for day after day that make the biggest difference over time." Arthur left the clinic that day with a spring in his step, the doctor's words echoing in his mind. By the end of that first month, Arthur realized something important. This wasn't just about blueberries anymore. It was about the simple truth that change didn't have to come from sweeping overhauls or grand gestures. Sometimes it could come from a single small thing, repeated with care, woven gently into the fabric of everyday life. That, he thought, was the real power of the tiny berry seniors swore by. Arthur Blake had been eating his morning blueberries for several weeks now, and though the changes were subtle, they were undeniable. One afternoon, while sitting by the window reading a history novel, he suddenly recalled the name of his old college roommate, Robert Keating, a name that had eluded him for years. The memory didn't come with effort or strain. It surfaced naturally, like a small boat drifting into view from behind the fog. That evening at dinner, he mentioned it to Emily, who laughed in surprise. "See, Dad? Your brain's finally rewarding you." The truth was, Arthur felt lighter somehow. He no longer panicked when a name or detail slipped his mind because he had begun to notice something important. Those lapses were becoming less frequent. Instead of stumbling for the right word in a conversation, he found himself speaking with more ease. His thoughts seemed to line up in neat rows rather than scatter like autumn leaves in the wind. And this newfound clarity brought with it a quiet confidence he hadn't felt in years. It was during a follow-up visit with Dr. Nathan that Arthur decided to share these little victories. The doctor listened patiently, nodding at the details, then leaned forward with a knowing smile. "You're starting to notice the difference because you've given your brain what it needs," he said. He explained that while many people assume memory inevitably declines with age, the reality is more hopeful. Our brains are capable of building new connections even in later years. "Think of it like a city," Dr. Nathan said. "Over time, some streets get blocked or damaged, but if you maintain the infrastructure, you can still get around easily. Blueberries, exercise, and good sleep, they're like road repairs for your mind." Arthur liked that image. It made him think of his small town where crews were always patching up the main road after winter. In his own quiet way, he was doing the same thing for himself, repairing, maintaining, preserving. And as the weeks went by, he began to appreciate that memory wasn't just about holding on to the past. It was about being fully present in the now, remembering the details of a conversation, recalling where he'd left his tools, recognizing a neighbor's face. These were the things that kept life running smoothly, that allowed him to feel connected to the world around him. One morning, Arthur sat at the kitchen table with a crossword puzzle. Months earlier, he would have gotten frustrated halfway through, irritated at how often he needed to check the dictionary or leave blanks behind. But this time was different. The clues seemed to come more easily, and when he did get stuck, he found himself circling back to fill in the missing answers without much struggle. It wasn't about being faster, it was about feeling more capable, more in command of his thoughts. That sense of mental agility felt almost like a gift. Emily noticed other changes too. He was more engaged in conversations, quicker to respond, and less likely to drift into silence halfway through a story. "You're sharper, Dad," she told him one afternoon as they prepared lunch together. "Even your jokes are quicker." Arthur laughed at that, but inside he felt a swell of pride. It was comforting to know that the changes weren't just in his head, they were visible to the people he loved. Still, Arthur knew memory wasn't improved by blueberries alone. He took Dr. Nathan's advice to heart and began adding small mental exercises to his routine. He'd try to recall the list of items he needed before stepping into the grocery store, challenge himself to remember phone numbers instead of relying on his mobile, and even revisited his old hobby of playing chess with friends at the community center. Each little challenge felt like stretching a muscle, and just like his morning walks kept his legs strong, these exercises seemed to keep his mind nimble. One Saturday, Arthur ran into an old neighbor, Mrs. Whitfield, at the farmer's market. She was surprised when he greeted her by name and asked about her grandchildren. "Arthur Blake," she exclaimed, "you remembered. Most people my age forget what they had for breakfast." Arthur smiled warmly. "I've been working on it," he said. And in that moment, he realized how deeply these small wins mattered, not for vanity, but for connection. Being able to recall someone's name was a way of saying, "I see you. You matter to me." There was another benefit Arthur hadn't anticipated. With his mind feeling clearer, he also felt more motivated to plan and organize. He started keeping a small notebook in his pocket, jotting down ideas, reminders, and even snippets of poetry that popped into his head during walks. In the evenings, he'd review his notes, sometimes surprised by the thoughts he'd captured. It made him feel productive in a way that went beyond chores or errands. It was a reminder that his mind was still creating, still active, still alive. Dr. Nathan encouraged him to celebrate these small victories. "Arthur," he said during one visit, "sharper memory isn't just about remembering, it's about living more fully. When you can hold on to details, you experience life in richer colors." Arthur thought about that on his walk home, noticing the pale winter sun stretching across the rooftops, the crisp bite of the air, the crunch of leaves under his shoes. He realized that clarity of mind made the world feel more vivid, more worth savoring. It wasn't lost on Arthur that he had feared the opposite outcome. When those early memory lapses first began, he'd worried that life would slowly fade into a blur, that each year would take away a little more of the sharpness until the days all blended together. But now he felt he was moving in the other direction. The small act of starting his mornings with blueberries had rippled outward, influencing his mood, his focus, his relationships, and his sense of possibility. By the end of winter, Arthur began to see his sharpened memory not just as a benefit, but as a tool. It helped him keep track of the small joys, a joke from a friend, the exact shade of the sky before a snowfall, the name of a song he hadn't heard since childhood. These details weren't trivial, they were the threads that made up the fabric of his days. And holding on to them felt like holding on to himself. One evening, as he sat at his desk, writing in his notebook, Arthur thought about how far he'd come from that morning in his daughter's kitchen, when forgetting a neighbor's name had filled him with dread. He realized he couldn't promise himself perfect memory forever. No one could, but he could promise himself the care and attention that gave him the best chance of staying sharp. And for now, that was more than enough. Arthur Blake had never thought much about his blood sugar. He wasn't diabetic, and his sweet tooth had always been modest, an occasional slice of pie at church socials, a square of dark chocolate with his evening tea. But during a routine checkup one spring, Dr. Nathan brought it up. "Arthur," he said, glancing at the lab results, "your fasting glucose is creeping up. It's not alarming yet, but it's worth watching." Arthur remembered nodding politely, but the word creeping stuck in his mind. It made him think of ivy slowly overtaking an old fence, quiet at first, until one day you realize it's covered every inch. He didn't want his health to go that way. Dr. Nathan explained that as we age, our bodies naturally become less sensitive to insulin. "It's like a lock that's gotten rusty," he said. "The key still works, but it takes more effort." Arthur understood the image all too well. His old garden shed lock had given him trouble for years. That night, Arthur sat at his kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea, thinking about what Dr. Nathan had said. He'd read before that blueberries could help regulate blood sugar, but he'd always assumed that was just another health claim people threw around without proof. Still, he decided to do a little reading. To his surprise, the information was everywhere: studies, articles, even interviews with older adults who swore that their daily handful of blueberries had helped keep their sugar levels steady. Arthur thought about his own morning ritual. He'd already made blueberries a part of his life for his memory. Could they really help in another way too? It seemed almost too simple, but he'd learned that sometimes the simplest steps could make the biggest difference. The next morning, Arthur decided to make his breakfast with blood sugar in mind. Instead of white toast and jam, he opted for a bowl of steel-cut oats topped with blueberries, a sprinkle of cinnamon, and a few chopped walnuts. The meal felt hearty and satisfying, but what struck him most was how steady his energy felt afterward. He didn't get that mid-morning slump he sometimes experienced. By lunchtime, he realized he hadn't once felt the urge to snack on biscuits or crackers. Encouraged, Arthur kept experimenting. He replaced sugary desserts with a small bowl of Greek yogurt and blueberries. He started adding a few blueberries to his afternoon green smoothie, blending them with spinach, banana, and almond milk. Emily noticed the change. "Dad, you're snacking healthier these days," she said approvingly. "Trying to set a good example for your old man?" Arthur chuckled. "Something like that." One day at the community center, Arthur mentioned his new habit to Margaret, the friend who'd first told him about her late husband's blueberry routine. She leaned in conspiratorially. "You know what I do? I freeze them. They're like little sorbets, sweet enough to satisfy a craving, but they won't spike your sugar." Arthur tried it that evening, and she was right. The frozen berries were refreshing, almost like candy, but without the guilt. The real test came during his next doctor's visit. A month had passed since his last appointment, and Arthur was curious to see if his efforts had made any measurable difference. When Dr. Nathan reviewed the results, his eyebrows lifted slightly. "Your fasting glucose has dropped a few points," he said. "That's a good sign. Keep doing what you're doing." Arthur left the clinic with a quiet sense of triumph. It wasn't a dramatic change, but it was movement in the right direction. Still, Arthur knew that managing blood sugar wasn't just about one food. He began pairing his blueberries with foods rich in fiber and protein to slow digestion even further. Sometimes it was a slice of whole grain bread with almond butter and a handful of blueberries on the side. Other times it was a salad sprinkled with berries and sunflower seeds. Each choice felt deliberate, like a small investment in his future self. As he became more mindful about his meals, Arthur also noticed another shift. He was more aware of how different foods made him feel. A heavy, carb-filled lunch left him sluggish, while a balanced meal with berries kept his energy stable and his mind alert. It was a kind of feedback loop. The better he felt, the more motivated he was to keep making good choices. One rainy afternoon, Arthur invited Emily over for tea. He served her his new favorite snack, blueberries with cottage cheese and a drizzle of honey. She took a bite and smiled. "This is actually really good," she said. Arthur grinned. "Not bad for an old man watching his sugar, eh?" They laughed, but Arthur knew there was truth behind the joke. He wasn't just watching his sugar, he was actively shaping the way he aged. The benefits of his new approach became more apparent over time. Arthur found he could walk longer without feeling drained, focus on his crossword puzzles with more clarity, and even sleep more soundly. The mid-afternoon drowsiness that used to have him reaching for coffee was now a rarity, and perhaps most importantly, he felt in control, like he was steering his health rather than letting it drift. Dr. Nathan continued to encourage him. "Arthur," he said during one visit, "every point you keep your blood sugar stable is a point in your favor against heart disease, nerve problems, and fatigue. You're giving your body a chance to work the way it should." Arthur liked hearing that. It wasn't about chasing perfection, it was about giving himself the best odds for a good, active life. By summer, Arthur's blueberry habit had become so natural that he barely thought about it anymore. It wasn't a diet or a restriction, it was simply part of who he was now. Friends at the community center started teasing him, calling him the Blueberry Man. Arthur didn't mind. If a handful of blueberries could help keep his memory sharp and his sugar balanced, he was happy to wear the title. One evening, as he sat on the porch watching the sunset, Arthur thought about the slow, creeping ivy Dr. Nathan had described months earlier. He pictured it in his mind, not as a threat now, but as something he had trimmed back, kept in check, maybe even redirected toward something beautiful. The fence was still strong, the garden was still his, and all it took was a small, sweet ally, one that fit easily into his palm. Arthur Blake had always prided himself on his eyesight. Even well into his 70s, he could still read the fine print on the back of a cereal box without fumbling for reading glasses. But over the past year, he had begun noticing subtle changes. Street signs seemed a little blurrier at night. Reading for long stretches left his eyes feeling strained, and sometimes, while working in his garden, he'd find himself squinting against the sunlight as though the glare was suddenly harsher than before. It wasn't alarming, at least not yet, but it was enough to make him think. He'd seen friends his age struggle with cataracts, macular degeneration, and other vision problems. The thought of losing his sharpness, of not being able to read his beloved books or clearly see Emily's smile, unsettled him. One afternoon during a routine checkup, Arthur brought it up to Dr. Nathan. "It's nothing serious," he said, "just things aren't as crisp as they used to be." Dr. Nathan leaned back thoughtfully. "That's normal with age," he said, "but you can slow it down. And interestingly, those blueberries you've been eating, they're one of the best foods for eye health," Arthur chuckled. "Is there anything they don't do?" But Dr. Nathan was serious. He explained that blueberries contain anthocyanins, natural compounds that not only protect the retina but also improve circulation in the tiny capillaries that feed the eyes. They help reduce oxidative stress, which can damage the macula, the part of the eye responsible for sharp, central vision. And they even support the eye's ability to filter harmful light. The next morning, Arthur looked at his bowl of blueberries with fresh appreciation. He thought about how each little berry might be quietly working to keep his vision clear. It gave him a sense of comfort, knowing he was taking daily steps to protect something as precious as his sight. Arthur decided to test a small experiment. For the next month, he would not only eat blueberries every day, but also be mindful of how his eyes felt during activities he loved. Reading, gardening, and his weekend walks by the lake. Within 2 weeks, he noticed something subtle but encouraging. His eyes didn't feel as tired after reading in the afternoon. The glare from the sun while gardening seemed less harsh, and one evening, while watching the sunset, the colors appeared more vivid than they had in months. Emily noticed it too. One Saturday, as they sat together on the porch, she caught him looking at the blooming lilacs across the yard. "You're staring like you've never seen them before," she teased. Arthur smiled. "Maybe I'm just seeing them better now." At the community center, Arthur shared his discovery with Margaret. She nodded knowingly. "I've been eating blueberries for my eyes for years," she said. "After my husband had his cataract surgery, his doctor recommended more foods rich in antioxidants. I swear it's helped me keep mine healthy." Arthur started looking for new ways to include blueberries in his meals, not just in the mornings. Sometimes he tossed them into a spinach salad with walnuts and a light vinaigrette. Other times, he added them to a small bowl of cottage cheese as an afternoon snack. He even tried a new dessert recipe Emily found, baked blueberries with a sprinkle of oats and cinnamon. Each bite felt like both a treat and an investment in his vision. During his next visit, Dr. Nathan did a quick eye exam. "Your vision hasn't changed since last time," he said. "That's good news. No signs of significant decline." Arthur felt a quiet relief. He knew it wasn't proof that blueberries were a magic cure, but he was convinced they were part of the reason things were holding steady. He also started paying more attention to habits that complemented his blueberry routine, wearing sunglasses on bright days, taking short breaks when reading, and doing simple eye exercises Dr. Nathan had suggested. But no matter what else he added, the blueberries remained at the center of his daily care. One evening in early summer, Arthur took a walk to the lake near his home. The sun was low, casting a golden glow across the water. He noticed how clearly he could see the ripples spreading from a family of ducks gliding across the surface. The details, the way the water caught the light, the crisp outline of each bird felt sharper than they had in a long time. He stopped for a moment just to take it in. It struck him then that vision wasn't something you only appreciated when it was perfect. It was something to cherish in every stage. Even the smallest improvements made the world richer. And if something as simple as a daily handful of blueberries could help preserve that gift, it was worth every bite. Emily later asked him why he seemed so content that evening. Arthur told her about the ducks, the light, and the clarity he'd felt. "It's not just about seeing," he said. "It's about not losing what I have." She nodded, understanding. By the end of the season, Arthur realized his blueberry habit had given him more than just sharper vision. It had given him a deeper awareness of the beauty around him. He noticed colors more vividly, patterns more distinctly, and even small details, a butterfly's wings, the texture of tree bark, that he might have overlooked before. Protecting his eyesight had become more than a health goal. It had become a way of staying connected to the world he loved. And in that way, blueberries were no longer just a food. They were a reminder every morning that the simplest choices can protect the things that matter most. Arthur Blake had always thought of his heart as a dependable old clock, steady, reliable, ticking along without much fuss. He'd never had chest pains or anything dramatic that sent him rushing to the hospital. But at 71, he knew enough friends who had suffered heart attacks or needed stents to realize that heart trouble often crept up quietly. One rainy Tuesday, during a follow-up with Dr. Nathan, the doctor glanced over Arthur's blood pressure reading and cholesterol numbers. "Not bad," he said, "but your LDL, the bad cholesterol, is a little higher than I'd like. Nothing urgent, but it's worth keeping an eye on." Arthur felt a familiar twinge of unease. He'd heard the stories, neighbors who seemed fine one day and were in the cardiac unit the next. Dr. Nathan leaned forward, lowering his voice as if sharing a personal tip. "Arthur, you've already made good changes with your diet, but I'll tell you this. Blueberries are one of the best things you can eat for your heart." Arthur smiled faintly. "You're starting to sound like a blueberry salesman, Doc." But Nathan's tone was serious. He explained how blueberries, with their deep blue pigments, were packed with compounds that helped reduce inflammation in blood vessels and kept arteries flexible. "Think of your arteries like garden hoses," he said. "Over time, they can get stiff and clogged. Blueberries help keep them supple, so blood can flow freely." The image stuck with Arthur. He'd fought with enough stubborn garden hoses in his lifetime to understand how important flexibility was. Back home, Arthur reflected on his heart's quiet work over the years, pumping faithfully through joys and sorrows, through his teaching days, through the long walks by the lake with his late wife, Margaret. The idea that something as small as a blueberry could help protect that faithful engine felt almost poetic. That week, Arthur made a point of weaving blueberries into more meals, not just breakfast. For lunch, he tossed them into a salad of spinach, walnuts, and goat cheese. For dessert, he layered them with plain Greek yogurt and a drizzle of honey. He found that the slight tartness of the berries balanced beautifully with other flavors, and knowing they were nourishing his heart made each bite more satisfying. He began to notice subtle changes. His energy during walks improved. He could go a little farther without feeling winded. Climbing the stairs at the community center felt easier. One afternoon, Emily joined him for a stroll around the neighborhood. "You're walking faster than usual," she remarked. Arthur grinned. "Maybe my heart's just keeping up with my feet better these days." At his next appointment, Dr. Nathan checked his blood pressure. It had dropped slightly, not a huge change, but enough for the doctor to nod approvingly. "Small improvements add up," he reminded Arthur. "Every point lower is a gift to your heart." Arthur also learned something new from a pamphlet he picked up at the clinic. Blueberries could help reduce the oxidation of LDL cholesterol. He thought about how rust formed on metal over time and realized the same thing could happen inside the body. Damage building slowly, silently. The idea that blueberries could act like a protective shield against that process made him even more committed to his daily bowl. One sunny Saturday, Arthur attended a community cooking class on heart-healthy meals for seniors. The instructor, a cheerful woman named Linda, demonstrated a simple blueberry vinaigrette. Arthur was skeptical at first, but when he drizzled it over a bed of mixed greens, he was pleasantly surprised. "You might be onto something here," he told her. She laughed. "Just don't blame me when you start buying blueberries by the crate." Arthur's friends began noticing his enthusiasm. At the community center, they teased him about being the blueberry ambassador. He didn't mind. If a small fruit could help keep his heart beating strong, he was happy to spread the word. The real reward came one crisp autumn morning. Arthur woke early, brewed his coffee, and set out for a walk to the lake. The air was cool, the leaves blazing with color. As he walked, he felt a deep gratitude, not just for the view, but for the steady rhythm in his chest. Each beat felt like a quiet reminder of all the mornings he'd been given, all the moments yet to come. He thought about how, in his younger years, he'd taken his heart for granted, assuming it would always be there, always reliable. Now he understood it was a gift that needed tending like any other part of his body. And every handful of blueberries was his way of saying, "I'm looking after you, old friend." Later that day, as he sat on his porch with Emily, she asked what he was thinking about. Arthur smiled. "Just giving thanks for my heart," he said. She reached over and squeezed his hand. "And it's thanking you right back." By then, blueberries weren't just a habit, they were a quiet act of devotion to the life he wanted to keep living. Protecting his heart wasn't about fear anymore, it was about honoring the days ahead. Arthur Blake had never been one to fuss over his appearance. He wore his years with quiet dignity, the laugh lines around his eyes, the silver in his hair, the way his hands bore the marks of decades spent gardening and fixing things. But in recent years, he had noticed changes that felt different from the usual signs of age. His skin seemed drier, thinner, the faint wrinkles on his forehead had deepened. And some mornings, when he caught his reflection in the mirror, he saw a man who looked more tired than he felt. It wasn't vanity that concerned him. It was a reminder that time was leaving its marks faster than before. His mother had always told him, "Arthur, your skin tells the story of how you've lived." And Arthur was proud of his story. But he wanted that story to be written in lines of laughter, not fatigue. One afternoon, while enjoying tea with Emily, she mentioned something that made him smile. "Dad, you look brighter lately, healthier. Did you get more sleep?" Arthur chuckled. "No, but I've been keeping up with my blueberries." Emily raised her eyebrows. "The miracle berries strike again?" As it turned out, Dr. Nathan had mentioned another surprising benefit of Arthur's daily ritual. Blueberries weren't just helping his memory, heart, and eyes. They could also slow some visible signs of aging, especially in the skin. "They're full of vitamin C," the doctor had explained, "which helps your body produce collagen. That's the protein that keeps your skin firm and smooth. And the antioxidants in blueberries help protect against the kind of damage that makes skin age faster." Arthur had always thought of skincare as something that came in a bottle, but here was his doctor telling him that it could also come from a fruit bowl. He found it oddly reassuring. Over the next few weeks, Arthur started paying more attention. His skin did seem less dry, his complexion a little more even. On a whim, he asked Emily to take a photo of him in the garden, the same spot where she had photographed him the previous year. Comparing the two, he could see a difference, not dramatic, but enough to notice. His face seemed more relaxed, his skin tone healthier. He remembered a time when winter would leave his skin chapped and rough, especially after hours spent outside pruning rose bushes or clearing snow from the path. But that year, even as the weather turned cold, his skin stayed softer. He still used his usual unscented lotion, but he couldn't ignore the thought that maybe, just maybe, the blueberries were lending a hand. One Saturday morning, Arthur decided to make himself a beauty breakfast, as he jokingly called it. Steel-cut oats topped with blueberries, slices of banana, and a sprinkle of ground flaxseed. As he ate, he thought about how strange it was that a simple change in his diet could ripple into so many areas of his life. He wasn't chasing youth, but he was embracing the idea of aging well, of looking in the mirror and seeing not just the passage of time, but the care he was taking with himself. At the community center, Arthur mentioned his little discovery to Margaret. She leaned in with a knowing smile. "I've been saying for years, good food is the best beauty secret. My granddaughter spends a fortune on creams. I just eat my colors. Blue, green, red, orange. Works just as well." Arthur laughed. "Maybe I should start calling you my beauty coach." Dr. Nathan reinforced the message during their next chat. "Arthur, remember, your skin is your largest organ. It reflects what's going on inside. Blueberries help fight inflammation, improve circulation, and protect against sun damage over time. You're not just seeing changes on the outside, you're supporting your skin from the inside out." Arthur found himself more aware of the little moments when his skin felt good after a warm shower, while sitting in the sun with a book, or when Emily kissed his cheek and said, "You feel nice and soft today, Dad." It was these moments that reminded him he wasn't just nourishing his body, he was also quietly building small joys into his days. One evening, while looking through an old album, Arthur came across a photograph of himself and Margaret from decades earlier. They were standing on a beach, wind in their hair, smiles wide and easy. His skin in the picture was smooth, sun-kissed, youthful. For a moment, he felt a pang of longing, but then he realized something. Yes, he looked younger then, but the man in that photograph hadn't yet learned the value of caring for himself in this gentle, intentional way. Aging, he thought, wasn't something to fight against. It was something to approach with grace. And if blueberries were helping him do that, then they were more than just food. They were an ally in this quiet, ongoing conversation he was having with time. By the time spring rolled around, Arthur noticed that his confidence had grown. Not in a boastful way, but in the way he carried himself. Shoulders a little straighter, smile a little quicker. Friends remarked that he seemed more vibrant, more present. He realized that part of this came from feeling good in his own skin, literally, and it all tied back to that small morning ritual, the bowl of blueberries that had started as a brain booster and had become so much more. On his birthday, Emily gave him a framed photo she'd taken that month. Arthur in the garden, hands in the soil, sunlight on his face. The lines were still there, of course, but they told a story of a life well lived, of resilience, care, and quiet joy. He placed it on the mantle, a reminder that beauty in age isn't about erasing time, it's about wearing it well. And every morning, as he poured blueberries into his bowl, Arthur smiled at the thought that he was doing just that. By now, Arthur Blake's blueberry ritual had become as natural as breathing. Every morning, without fail, he would rinse a small handful, watch the water bead and roll off their smooth skins, and pour them into his favorite porcelain bowl. It wasn't just breakfast, it was a promise to himself. One crisp Thursday morning, Arthur was sitting at his kitchen table, savoring the gentle sweetness of his blueberries stirred into a bowl of cereal. The sun was pouring in through the window, and he felt a quiet sense of contentment. That was until he picked up a health magazine that Emily had left behind after her visit. An article headline caught his eye: "The surprising food pairings that cancel out antioxidants." Curious, he began to read. To his surprise, blueberries were right there on the list. The article explained how certain combinations could reduce or even block the very nutrients he had been relying on for his memory, heart, and vision. And the first example? Blueberries with cow's milk. Arthur froze for a moment. That was exactly how he'd been eating them for weeks, mixed into his cereal, swimming in milk. The writer explained how proteins in dairy could bind with the anthocyanins in blueberries, making it harder for the body to absorb their full benefits. He set down his spoon, suddenly less enthusiastic about the last few bites. A small wave of frustration rose in him. He'd been so proud of his commitment, only to find he might have been undermining himself without even knowing it. Later that week, during his regular walk to the community center, Arthur mentioned it to Margaret. "Did you know milk might be canceling out the good in blueberries?" She nodded knowingly. "Oh, I stopped doing that ages ago, switched to almond milk. Tastes just as nice once you get used to it." Still unsettled, Arthur decided to bring it up with Dr. Nathan. During his next appointment, he asked bluntly, "Doc, am I wasting my blueberries if I eat them with milk?" Nathan gave him a patient smile. "Not wasting exactly, but you're not getting the full punch. If you want the maximum benefit, have them on their own or with something like plant-based milk, yogurt without dairy proteins, or even just oatmeal cooked with water." Arthur left the clinic with mixed feelings, part relief, part annoyance. He wasn't angry at the berries, of course, but it bothered him that such a simple detail could make such a difference. It was like finding out you'd been watering your garden with a hose that had a slow leak. That weekend, he decided to make the change. He picked up a carton of unsweetened almond milk and gave it a try. To his surprise, he actually liked the nutty flavor it added to his cereal. He even experimented with oat milk, which turned out to be pleasantly creamy. But the magazine article had mentioned more than just milk. It warned about other surprising combinations, too. That planted a seed of curiosity in Arthur's mind. If milk could interfere, what else might be quietly sabotaging his health efforts? He resolved to learn more. One afternoon, while Emily was visiting, Arthur brought it up over tea. "Did you know that some foods cancel each other out? Not just blueberries, lots of foods. Seems like the wrong pairing can make a good thing go to waste." Emily frowned. "That's frustrating. I guess it's not just what we eat, but how we eat it." That thought stuck with Arthur. Over the next few days, he started reading more about food combinations, articles, doctor interviews, even a library book on nutrition for seniors. He discovered that cucumbers could reduce vitamin C from berries, pineapple's acidity could cause stomach upset when mixed with them, and that sometimes spacing foods apart by just an hour or two could make all the difference. Arthur wasn't looking to turn his kitchen into a laboratory, but he appreciated having a clearer picture. He began timing his meals differently: blueberries in the morning by themselves, cucumbers in the afternoon, pineapple as an occasional separate treat. It wasn't complicated, just more mindful. Margaret noticed the change when they met at the community center cafe. Instead of ordering a fruit salad that mixed everything together, Arthur chose a simple plate of blueberries and sliced strawberries. "You're serious about this, aren't you?" she said with a grin. Arthur nodded. "If I'm going to do this, I want to do it right." The first week of this new approach, Arthur noticed something subtle but real. The same calm clarity he'd felt from his blueberry habit seemed stronger. His energy felt smoother throughout the day. And maybe it was his imagination, but his morning crosswords seemed to flow a little more easily. Dr. Nathan was pleased during their next chat. "You've just taken your health game up a notch," he told Arthur. "It's like tuning a piano. You're making sure all the parts work together, not against each other." Arthur left the clinic smiling. The shocking truth wasn't a cause for despair, it was an opportunity. He realized that being informed wasn't about fear, it was about respect for the effort he was putting into his health. That night, as he rinsed a fresh handful of blueberries and ate them slowly, without milk, he thought about how much he had learned since that first simple habit began. The berries were still delicious, still satisfying, but now they carried an extra layer of meaning, a symbol of not just care, but smart care. And in that quiet moment, Arthur promised himself something. If there were more truths to discover, no matter how small or surprising, he would face them with curiosity, not frustration. After all, every detail mattered when you were investing in the years ahead. Arthur Blake could still remember the sound of the milk bottle clinking onto his family's doorstep when he was a boy. Milk had been part of his life for as long as he could remember, poured over cereal, stirred into tea, whipped into cream for Sunday desserts. It was comforting, familiar, and, in his mind, wholesome. So when he first started his blueberry habit, adding them to a bowl of cereal, swimming in cow's milk seemed only natural. The cold milk softened the cereal, the berries popped with sweetness. It was breakfast at its most comforting. It never crossed his mind that this familiar pairing might be undermining the very benefits he was seeking. That was until he stumbled on the magazine article warning about milk's effect on blueberries. The words had struck him like a sudden gust of wind. Proteins in cow's milk can bind with anthocyanins, reducing antioxidant absorption. It felt strange to think of milk, so tied to his memories of childhood and family meals, as a quiet saboteur of his health goals. He wasn't angry at the milk itself, he just wished he'd known sooner. When Arthur asked Dr. Nathan about it, the doctor explained patiently, "It's not that milk is bad, it has its own nutrients. But if your goal is to maximize what blueberries can do, you're better off keeping them apart. Even a 2 to 3 hour gap makes a difference." He suggested plant-based alternatives like almond, oat, or coconut milk, which don't seem to have the same effect on antioxidant absorption. Arthur decided to make the switch. The next time he went to the market, he found himself staring at a row of unfamiliar cartons: almond milk, soy milk, oat milk, even hazelnut milk. The labels were full of words he'd never associated with milk before. Barista blend, fortified with calcium, unsweetened. After some deliberation, he picked up a carton of unsweetened almond milk, figuring it was a safe place to start. The first morning, he poured it over his cereal with a skeptical eye. The liquid was thinner than cow's milk, with a faint, nutty aroma. He hesitated for a moment before taking a bite. To his surprise, it wasn't bad at all, different but pleasant. The mild nuttiness actually complemented the blueberries, and after a few spoonfuls, he found himself wondering why he hadn't tried it sooner. Encouraged, Arthur experimented. Oat milk was creamier and gave his morning porridge a lovely richness. Coconut milk added a tropical note that paired well with berries and banana. He even tried cashew milk, which had a smoothness that felt almost indulgent. It wasn't long before he realized he didn't miss cow's milk in his breakfasts at all, and knowing that his blueberries were now working at full capacity gave him an extra layer of satisfaction. Margaret noticed the change when they met for lunch at the community center cafe. "No milk in your tea?" she asked, surprised. Arthur grinned. "I'm giving my blueberries a fighting chance," she laughed. "You're a man on a mission." Over time, this simple change became second nature. Arthur no longer reached automatically for the milk jug when preparing breakfast. Instead, He reached for whichever plant-based milk he had on hand, often choosing based on the flavor he felt like that day. The switch had even nudged him to rethink other small habits, like cutting back on heavy cream and sauces or opting for lighter yogurt varieties. But it wasn't just about replacing milk. Arthur also began spacing his dairy and blueberries apart when he did want both in the same day. If he had a creamy Greek yogurt mid-morning, he'd save his blueberries for an afternoon snack, eaten on their own or with a handful of walnuts. This small act of timing gave him peace of mind, knowing he wasn't accidentally canceling out the very nutrients he wanted. Emily noticed the difference. "You seem more intentional about your food now," she said one afternoon while visiting. Arthur nodded. "I suppose I am. Feels like I'm getting smarter about it, not just going through the motions." One rainy afternoon, Arthur decided to bake. He tried a recipe for blueberry oat muffins using almond milk instead of cow's milk. As the scent filled his kitchen, he thought about how small changes can ripple into bigger ones. The muffins came out golden and tender, the berries bursting with juice. When Emily stopped by later and bit into one, she closed her eyes in delight. "Dad, these are amazing," Arthur smiled, "and they're blueberry-friendly too." The more he embraced this change, the more he realized it wasn't a loss at all. It was a gain. He hadn't given up milk entirely. He'd simply learned to use it wisely in ways that didn't undermine the work he was putting into his health. And in doing so, he felt more in control, more informed, more capable of making choices that truly supported his well-being. One evening, as he prepared a simple supper, Arthur reflected on how something as humble as a bowl of blueberries had taught him so much. He'd started out just wanting to sharpen his memory. Along the way, he'd discovered how food combinations, timing, and even small substitutions could make a real difference. And now, every time he poured almond milk over his cereal or oat milk into his tea, he felt like he was honoring that lesson, protecting not just the benefits of his blueberries, but the bigger picture of his health. Arthur Blake had always enjoyed a good fruit and veg salad. On warm summer days, he would mix juicy strawberries, crisp cucumbers, and sweet blueberries into a colorful bowl, drizzle on a bit of honey lime dressing, and call it lunch. It looked beautiful, tasted refreshing, and in his mind was the perfect example of healthy eating. That was until another piece of food pairing news caught him off guard. He was flipping through a booklet on nutrition at the community center when a small paragraph made him pause. Cucumber contains an enzyme, ascorbate oxidase, which can break down vitamin C in certain fruits when eaten together, reducing absorption. Arthur frowned. Blueberries were rich in vitamin C. Could cucumbers really rob them of it before his body had a chance to use it? He took the booklet home and read the section twice, then called Emily. "You're telling me my cucumber blueberry salad is sabotaging itself?" she teased. "Seems so," Arthur replied with a sigh. The next day, Arthur mentioned it to Dr. Nathan during a quick check-in. The doctor confirmed it. "It's not harmful," he explained, "but if you're eating blueberries for their vitamin C, pairing them with cucumber isn't the best choice. That enzyme in cucumbers can break down some of the vitamin before you absorb it. The fix is easy. Just eat them at different times. Even 30 minutes apart makes a difference." Arthur felt both relieved and slightly amused. First milk, now cucumbers. It seemed that his blueberries were pickier about company than he had ever imagined. Determined to adapt, Arthur began rethinking his salad routine. Instead of tossing cucumber slices in with his berries, he kept them for a later snack, paired with hummus, tomato, or feta cheese. The blueberries stayed in their own corner of the plate, sometimes mingling with banana or apple slices instead. At first, the separation felt a bit fussy, but Arthur quickly got used to it, and the salad still tasted just as good, maybe better. He began experimenting with new combinations: spinach and blueberries with walnut vinaigrette, blueberry and watermelon salad with fresh mint, even blueberry and roasted beet salad for a richer, earthy sweetness. One afternoon, while prepping lunch for a few friends from the community center, Arthur made 2 large salad bowls, one vegetable-based with cucumber and another fruit-based with blueberries and strawberries. He set them out side by side. Margaret laughed. "You've gone gourmet on us, Arthur." He smiled. "Let's just say I've learned to keep certain friends apart at the table." The change wasn't just about protecting vitamin C, it was also about being intentional. Arthur noticed that by keeping blueberries as the star of their own dish, he savored them more. He appreciated their tart sweetness instead of letting them get lost in a jumble of flavors. Emily noticed the difference when she visited. "This fruit salad is so fresh," she said between bites. "You can actually taste each thing on its own." Arthur nodded. "Exactly. And it's better for the berries this way." Over time, he realized that spacing foods apart wasn't a hardship, it was a rhythm. Blueberries in the morning, cucumber in the afternoon, each got its own moment, its own spotlight. And strangely, that made him enjoy them both more. One sunny Saturday, Arthur attended a local cooking workshop. The chef, a lively woman in her 50s, was teaching perfect pairings for peak nutrition. When she brought up the cucumber vitamin C issue, Arthur grinned knowingly. "Already ahead of you," he said when she mentioned blueberries. She laughed. "Then you're doing your homework." It was satisfying to see how these small changes were becoming habits, woven into his daily life without much thought. And they were paying off. Arthur still felt steady, clear-headed, and energized. He knew the science might be subtle, but to him, the benefits felt tangible. One evening, as he sat at his kitchen table with a small bowl of blueberries, Arthur reflected on how these discoveries had changed his relationship with food. What started as a single healthy habit had opened his eyes to the quiet ways foods interact, sometimes helping each other, sometimes competing. And the more he learned, the more he felt he was playing an active role in his own well-being. By now, he didn't see these adjustments as restrictions. They were simply refinements, little tweaks that honored the effort he was making to age well. He thought about how many people ate with good intentions but unknowingly missed out on the full benefits of their food. And he felt quietly grateful that he was no longer one of them. Before bed, Arthur jotted a note in his small kitchen journal. Blueberries and cucumbers, great neighbors, but better in separate houses. It made him chuckle, but it also summed up a lesson he'd keep with him. Respect what each food brings and give it the space to shine. Arthur Blake had always enjoyed pineapple. It reminded him of family picnics in his younger days, thick, golden slices laid out on a platter, their sweet, tangy fragrance mingling with the summer air. Sometimes he'd throw pineapple chunks into a fruit salad with blueberries, thinking the bright colors and tropical flavors made a perfect match. But over the past year, Arthur had noticed something odd. On days when he ate pineapple and blueberries together, especially first thing in the morning, his stomach sometimes felt unsettled. Nothing dramatic, just a faint burning in his chest, a touch of bloating, or an uncomfortable heaviness that lingered longer than it should. He chalked it up to age at first, but the pattern was hard to ignore. One afternoon, after a particularly sour bout of acid reflux, he decided to bring it up with Dr. Nathan. "It's strange," Arthur said. "Pineapple and blueberries seem to disagree with me if I eat them together." Dr. Nathan nodded knowingly. "That's not unusual. Pineapple is very acidic, and when you pair it with another acidic fruit like blueberries, it can increase stomach acid production. For some people, especially as they get older, that can lead to discomfort, reflux, or bloating." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "So it's not just me getting delicate?" Nathan chuckled. "Not at all. Even younger people can feel it if they overdo the acid. Your digestive system just isn't as forgiving as it was 30 years ago." The doctor went on to explain that pineapple also contains bromelain, an enzyme that can irritate sensitive stomachs when combined with certain foods. "You can still enjoy pineapple," Nathan reassured him, "just not at the same time as your blueberries. Give them a little space, at least an hour apart." Arthur appreciated the advice, but was a bit disappointed. He'd always loved the vibrant combination in his morning fruit bowl. Still, he'd learned enough from his earlier discoveries, milk, cucumber, that sometimes separating foods was worth the trouble. The next morning, he decided to try a new approach. Blueberries at breakfast, pineapple as an afternoon treat. It felt a little strange at first, but he quickly realized that spacing them apart actually let him savor each one more fully. The blueberries tasted sharper, fresher when they weren't competing with pineapple's bold sweetness. And the pineapple, eaten later in the day, was like a burst of sunshine in the middle of his routine. Emily noticed the change during a weekend brunch. "No pineapple in the fruit salad?" she asked. Arthur smiled. "Keeping the peace in my stomach," she laughed. "You're getting very diplomatic with your food these days." As weeks passed, Arthur found that his digestive comfort improved noticeably. No more mid-morning bloating, no more uncomfortable acid burn. Even his energy felt steadier without that heavy feeling dragging him down after breakfast. Margaret, ever curious about Arthur's latest blueberry rules, asked him about it at the community center cafe. "I never thought about pineapple being a problem," she said, stirring her tea. Arthur explained what Dr. Nathan had told him, adding with a grin, "Apparently my stomach likes its fruits to have their own time slots." Margaret chuckled. "Makes sense. Mine likes to take things slow too." Arthur began experimenting with new blueberry pairings to replace pineapple in his morning bowls. Banana was an easy favorite, soft, sweet, and gentle on the stomach. Sliced pears worked beautifully, their mellow flavor letting the blueberries shine. Occasionally, he'd add a few raspberries or apple slices for variety. The fruit bowls still looked colorful and inviting, just without the hidden digestive trap. One Saturday morning, he hosted a small breakfast for a few friends. The spread included a vibrant fruit platter, blueberries with banana and kiwi on one side, pineapple arranged neatly on a separate plate. When someone asked why they were divided, Arthur explained his reasoning. A few guests nodded knowingly. Apparently, he wasn't the only one who'd experienced pineapple's less pleasant side effects. That afternoon, Arthur sat on his porch with a small dish of pineapple chunks. The sun was warm on his face, the fruit sweet and tangy on his tongue. He realized he didn't miss mixing it with blueberries at all. In fact, having them separately felt like giving each fruit its own stage to perform on. By now, Arthur had grown used to the idea that his blueberry habit wasn't just about eating blueberries, it was about optimizing them. It was about understanding how different foods worked together or didn't, and adjusting accordingly. The more he learned, the more he appreciated the small but meaningful ways these changes improved his daily life. One evening, jotting in his kitchen journal, he wrote, "Blueberries and pineapple, both treasures, just not dance partners." It made him smile. It also reminded him how much more in tune he'd become with his body's signals. What once seemed like random discomfort now had a clear cause and an easy fix. For Arthur, that knowledge was empowering. It wasn't about giving up foods he loved, it was about eating them in a way that let his body get the best of both. And that, he thought, was the kind of wisdom worth carrying into the years ahead. After weeks of learning what not to pair with blueberries, Arthur Blake was ready for some good news. The milk issue, the cucumber situation, the pineapple discomfort, it had all been useful information, but a bit disheartening at times. He wanted to know what he could combine with his morning berries to make them even more powerful. One Saturday morning, Arthur brought the question to Dr. Nathan during a routine checkup. "All right, Doc," he said with a half smile, "I've learned all the blueberry don'ts. Now tell me the do's. What can I eat with them that will make them work even harder?" Nathan leaned back in his chair, clearly pleased by the question. "I'm glad you asked. There are foods that actually complement blueberries, helping your body absorb their nutrients better, keeping your blood sugar steadier, and even adding their own health benefits to the mix. Think of them as blueberries' best friends." Arthur liked the sound of that. He took out the small notepad he now carried in his jacket pocket, ready to jot down whatever Nathan said next. "First," Nathan began, "bananas. They're rich in potassium, vitamin B6, and soluble fiber. When you combine them with blueberries, the fiber helps slow the release of natural sugars from both fruits, which is good for your blood sugar and energy levels. Plus, the flavor pairing is hard to beat." Arthur nodded, picturing the soft sweetness of banana with the tangy burst of blueberries. "What's next?" "Greek yogurt," Nathan said. "Unsweetened, of course. It's high in protein, which helps keep you full longer, and it's packed with probiotics that improve gut health. The healthy bacteria in yogurt can help your body absorb more antioxidants from blueberries." Arthur wrote it down carefully. He'd enjoyed yogurt in the past, but he hadn't thought of it as a nutrient booster for berries. "And finally," Nathan added, "walnuts or mixed nuts. They're full of omega-3 fatty acids, vitamin E, and minerals that support brain and heart health. Combined with blueberries' antioxidants, they make a powerhouse snack for your mind and body." Arthur smiled as he closed his notebook. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he was adding tools to his toolbox instead of just removing hazards. The next morning, he put the advice into action. His breakfast bowl featured sliced banana, a generous handful of blueberries, a scoop of plain Greek yogurt, and a sprinkling of chopped walnuts. The colors alone were enough to make him smile: soft yellow, deep blue, creamy white, and earthy brown. The flavors blended beautifully, and the crunch of the walnuts made each bite satisfying. He noticed something else, too. This breakfast kept him comfortably full well past noon. No mid-morning biscuit cravings, no wandering into the kitchen for an unnecessary snack. just steady, quiet energy. Encouraged, Arthur began rotating these blueberry friends into his meals throughout the week. Sometimes it was a smoothie with banana, blueberries, and oat milk. Other days it was a yogurt parfait layered with blueberries, nuts, and a sprinkle of cinnamon. He even started topping his evening salads with a few blueberries and chopped walnuts for a sweet, savory touch. Emily noticed the change during a weekend visit. "Dad, this parfait is delicious," she said between spoonfuls. "I'm stealing this idea." Arthur grinned. "Go ahead, it's doctor approved." At the community center, Arthur shared his new pairing wisdom with Margaret over tea. She lit up at the idea of banana blueberry smoothies. "And walnuts. I've got a whole jar at home. You might be onto something, Arthur." It wasn't long before Arthur realized these pairings weren't just boosting his health, they were making his meals more enjoyable. He no longer saw blueberries as a standalone medicine, but as part of a rich, varied diet. It felt less like a strict health habit and more like a lifestyle he genuinely enjoyed. One rainy afternoon, Arthur decided to experiment further. He blended blueberries, banana, Greek yogurt, and a dash of cinnamon into a thick smoothie. As he sipped it slowly, he thought about how different this felt from when he first started eating blueberries months ago. Back then, it was a single habit, a small step he hoped would make a difference. Now it had evolved into a thoughtful, intentional approach to eating, one that connected his meals to his goals in a way that felt satisfying and sustainable. At his next appointment, Nathan was pleased. "You're making the most of your blueberries now," he said, "and that's the key. It's not just about what you add to your diet, it's about making those additions work together for your health." Arthur left the clinic that day feeling not just healthy, but capable. He'd learned that food wasn't just fuel, it was a set of choices that could either work with or against him. And now, thanks to a few simple pairings, he felt like he had the balance firmly in his favor. As he sat down the next morning with his favorite breakfast bowl, banana, blueberries, yogurt, and walnuts, Arthur smiled. Each bite felt like a quiet, delicious step toward the life he wanted to keep living. Sharp-minded, steady-hearted, and strong. Arthur Blake had enjoyed bananas for most of his life, though he'd never thought of them as anything more than a quick snack. They were the sort of fruit you grabbed on the way out the door or sliced over cereal without much thought. But now, after Dr. Nathan's advice, he began to see bananas differently, not just as a fruit, but as a perfect partner for his beloved blueberries. It started one breezy Tuesday morning. Arthur stood in his kitchen, holding a ripe banana in one hand and a small bowl of blueberries in the other. He sliced the banana into neat rounds, letting them fall into his favorite breakfast bowl, then sprinkled the blueberries on top. The colors made him smile, soft yellow against deep blue, like a summer sky scattered with twilight. The first spoonful was a quiet revelation. The creamy sweetness of the banana mellowed the tart burst of the blueberry, creating a balance that felt just right. There was no overpowering flavor, just a gentle harmony. And beyond taste, Arthur knew this pairing was doing more for him than he could see. The banana's potassium supported his heart and muscles, its soluble fiber helped steady his blood sugar, and together with the blueberry's antioxidants, they were giving his body a morning gift it could truly use. Within days, banana and berry mornings became a regular thing. Sometimes he added a sprinkle of cinnamon for warmth, other times a handful of chopped walnuts for crunch. The combination kept him satisfied for hours, avoiding the mid-morning hunger that used to tempt him toward biscuits or leftover cake. Emily noticed the change one weekend when they made breakfast together. "You've really turned into a breakfast artist," she teased, watching him arrange banana slices like petals around the edge of the bowl. Arthur grinned. "It's not just about looks, it's about teamwork. These two are a match made in nature." At the community center cafe, Arthur even convinced Margaret to try the pairing. The following week, she told him, "You were right, I didn't even want my usual scone. That banana and blueberry mix kept me going until lunch." Arthur chuckled. "Told you, nature knows what she's doing." As the weeks went on, Arthur experimented with different ways to enjoy the duo. Some mornings he blended them into a smoothie with almond milk and a spoonful of Greek yogurt. On warmer days, he froze banana slices and blueberries overnight, then blended them into a creamy, ice cream-like treat he could enjoy guilt-free. On cooler mornings, he stirred them into steaming oatmeal, letting the blueberries burst and the banana melt into a natural sweetness. It didn't take long for Arthur to notice the ripple effects. His morning energy felt more stable, and he was able to focus longer on his crossword puzzles or the gardening tasks waiting in his backyard. His mood seemed steadier too, as though starting the day with something nourishing and intentional set the tone for everything that followed. One Saturday, Arthur joined a small cooking workshop at the local library. The instructor asked everyone to share a favorite healthy breakfast idea. When it was his turn, Arthur described his banana blueberry routine. To his surprise, several people scribbled it down in their notebooks. One woman even leaned over after class and whispered, "I'm going to try that tomorrow. My husband's been looking for something to keep him full until lunch." The moment made Arthur smile. He realized that this little habit of his wasn't just helping him, it might end up helping others too. And that gave him a sense of quiet pride. Dr. Nathan was pleased as well during their next chat. "Bananas and blueberries," he said, "are a classic example of foods that complement each other. You're getting fiber, potassium, antioxidants, and a slow release of natural sugars. That's why you feel full longer and your energy stays steady." Arthur left the clinic thinking about how simple this all was. No complicated diets, no expensive supplements, just 2 fruits, chosen well, working together in a way that felt effortless. By now, he didn't even have to think about it. On shopping days, bananas and blueberries were always on his list. He liked knowing that no matter what else changed in his week, he could count on this little ritual to start his mornings on the right note. One evening, while jotting in his kitchen journal, Arthur wrote, "Banana and berry, partners in crime, partners in health." It made him chuckle, but it also felt true. These 2 humble fruits had become a daily reminder that taking care of himself didn't have to be complicated. Sometimes the simplest choices really were the best ones. And every morning, as he arranged those soft yellow slices and deep blue jewels in his breakfast bowl, Arthur felt like he was setting the stage for another good day. One that began with a little sweetness, a lot of nourishment, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing he was doing something right. Arthur Blake had never paid much attention to protein. In his younger years, he figured as long as he had meat with dinner and a sandwich at lunch, he was fine. But as he entered his 70s, he began hearing more about the importance of protein for older adults, not just for strength, but for keeping muscles from fading away with age. It was Dr. Nathan who put it most clearly one afternoon. "Arthur," he said, "your muscles are like a retirement fund. If you don't keep putting something in, they'll run out faster than you want. Protein is one of the best investments you can make." Arthur laughed. "I suppose I don't want to go bankrupt." Nathan leaned in. "Greek yogurt is an excellent source of protein, and if you combine it with your blueberries, you get the muscle-building benefits of the yogurt along with the antioxidant power of the berries. That's a win-win." The next day, Arthur stopped by the grocery store and wandered over to the dairy aisle. Rows of yogurt cups and tubs stared back at him, some plain, some flavored, some with fruit already mixed in. He remembered Nathan's advice, unsweetened. Flavored yogurts, the doctor had warned, often hid as much sugar as a dessert. So Arthur picked up a tub of plain, unsweetened Greek yogurt, curious but cautious. The first morning, he spooned some into a bowl, topped it with a handful of blueberries, and drizzled just a touch of honey over the top. The yogurt was thicker than he expected, rich and creamy, with a tang that balanced the sweetness of the berries. He took a second bite, then a third. Before long, the bowl was empty, and he was feeling satisfied in a way that surprised him. That fullness lasted for hours. Usually by 10:30, Arthur found himself reaching for a biscuit or a slice of toast, but that day he made it all the way to lunch without even thinking about a snack. Encouraged, he began making Greek yogurt and blueberries part of his breakfast rotation. Sometimes he added banana slices for extra sweetness, other times a sprinkle of chopped walnuts for crunch. On weekends, he'd layer yogurt, berries, and oats into a simple parfait, which looked so pretty that even Emily commented, "Dad, this looks like something out of a cafe." Margaret, too, noticed the change when they met for coffee one morning. Arthur skipped his usual pastry and brought a small container from home, Greek yogurt, blueberries, and a dash of cinnamon. "You're turning into quite the health enthusiast," she teased. Arthur grinned. "Just making deposits into my muscle bank." As the weeks went by, Arthur started to feel subtle differences. His morning walks felt easier. Climbing the stairs to his study didn't leave him as winded. He even began helping Emily with heavier garden tasks, hauling bags of soil, moving potted plants, without the usual ache that lingered for days afterward. Dr. Nathan explained why during their next appointment. Greek yogurt's protein helps repair muscle fibers after activity. Combine that with the anti-inflammatory compounds in blueberries, and you've got a great recipe for staying strong and recovering faster. Arthur liked the sound of that. It made his simple breakfast feel like a purposeful step toward keeping his independence. He also began to appreciate how versatile Greek yogurt could be. In the afternoons, he'd stir in blueberries and a spoonful of ground flaxseed for a quick snack. On warm days, he'd blend it with frozen blueberries and banana to make a creamy smoothie. And when he had friends over, he'd serve it as a dessert, sweetened lightly with honey, topped with berries, and sprinkled with toasted oats. It looked indulgent but carried none of the guilt. Emily was especially impressed by his newfound creativity. "Who knew you had a secret chef hiding in there?" she said one evening as they shared a yogurt parfait after dinner. Arthur chuckled. "Turns out all it takes is a spoon and a few good ingredients." The more he enjoyed it, the more he noticed another unexpected benefit. His digestion felt better. Dr. Nathan explained that the probiotics in Greek yogurt helped maintain a healthy gut, which could improve everything from nutrient absorption to immune function. "You're not just feeding your muscles, Arthur," Nathan said. "You're feeding the healthy bacteria that keep your whole system running smoothly." One rainy afternoon, Arthur found himself reflecting on how far he'd come from his early blueberry days. Back then, it was a small, hopeful step toward sharper memory. Now it had blossomed into a web of good habits, pairing blueberries with banana for energy, spacing them away from milk and cucumber, and now adding Greek yogurt to protect his strength. In his kitchen journal, he scribbled a note: "Blueberries plus Greek yogurt, strength plus clarity." It might have looked like a simple math equation, but to Arthur, it was a reminder that even modest choices could add up to something powerful. And so each morning, as he topped his yogurt with blueberries, Arthur felt like he was doing more than just preparing breakfast. He was laying down another brick in the foundation of his future, one that he hoped would keep him walking, working, laughing, and living fully for many years to come. Arthur Blake had always enjoyed nuts, though mostly as a casual snack, salted peanuts at the pub with friends, or a handful of mixed nuts during holiday gatherings. But after hearing Dr. Nathan talk about walnuts, he realized he'd been overlooking something special. "Arthur," Nathan had said one afternoon, "walnuts are one of the best brain foods you can eat. They're rich in plant-based omega-3s, which help protect your neurons, improve memory, and reduce inflammation in the brain. Combine them with blueberries, and you have a true mind-protecting powerhouse." Arthur tilted his head. "So they're like a personal bodyguard for my brain?" Nathan chuckled. "Exactly. A crunchy one." That night, Arthur rummaged through his pantry and found an old jar of walnuts tucked in the back. They were a little stale, but the nutty aroma was still there. The next morning, he chopped a small handful and sprinkled them over his usual Greek yogurt and blueberries. The flavor was earthy, slightly bitter, but when paired with the sweet tart berries and creamy yogurt, it balanced beautifully. The texture made the breakfast feel more substantial. Each bite carried a satisfying crunch, and the richness of the walnuts left Arthur feeling pleasantly full. By mid-morning, he realized he wasn't thinking about snacks yet, something that rarely happened before. Over the next week, walnuts became a regular guest at his table. Sometimes he tossed them into a spinach and blueberry salad with a light vinaigrette. Other days, he mixed them into oatmeal alongside banana slices. When he wanted a quick afternoon pick-me-up, he'd simply grab a small handful of walnuts and a few blueberries from the fridge. Emily noticed the change during one of their Sunday brunches. "You've got a new crunch going on," she remarked, eyeing his breakfast bowl. Arthur grinned. "My brain insurance policy." It wasn't long before Arthur began to feel the benefits, or at least what he believed were the benefits. His focus during crossword puzzles seemed sharper. He could recall small details from conversations days earlier. At the community center's weekly trivia game, he surprised himself by answering a question about 1960s jazz without hesitation. Margaret, sitting across from him, raised her eyebrows. "Looks like those walnuts are working." One rainy afternoon, Arthur decided to read up on walnuts and brain health. He learned that the omega-3s in walnuts help strengthen cell membranes in the brain, making it easier for nerve cells to communicate. They also contain polyphenols, antioxidants that protect against oxidative stress, a culprit in age-related cognitive decline. Reading about the science made him feel even more committed to the habit. He began storing walnuts in a glass jar on the kitchen counter, right next to his fruit bowl. Seeing them there made it easy to sprinkle them into meals without thinking. He also learned that keeping them in the fridge helped maintain their freshness and flavor longer. At the community center, Arthur shared his newfound walnut wisdom with a small group during coffee hour. Pair them with blueberries, he advised, and you've got a breakfast that's good for your heart, your mind, and your mood. A few people nodded thoughtfully, jotting it down. One man even asked Arthur to write the combination on a napkin so he could try it at home. Doctor, Nathan was pleased during their next checkup. You're really making the most of your blueberries now, he said, and your brain will thank you for the walnuts. People underestimate the role of healthy fats in mental clarity. Arthur liked hearing that. It made his morning routine feel like more than just a pleasant habit. It was an intentional act of self-care for his mind. He also began to notice another subtle benefit. His mood felt steadier. On days when he had walnuts with his breakfast, he found himself less irritable in the afternoon, even when errands piled up or traffic slowed him down. Whether it was the nutrients or simply the satisfaction of knowing he was caring for himself, Arthur wasn't sure, but it was welcome. One sunny Saturday, he invited Margaret over for lunch. He served a salad of mixed greens, blueberries, crumbled feta, and toasted walnuts with a drizzle of olive oil and balsamic vinegar. She took a bite and sighed happily. "This tastes like summer in a bowl," Arthur smiled, "and it keeps your brain young while it's at it." That evening, Arthur sat on his porch with a small dish of blueberries and walnuts, watching the sun sink behind the trees. The air was cool and the sky was painted with streaks of pink and gold. As he popped each berry and nut into his mouth, he thought about how far he'd come since those first cautious steps into healthier eating. He no longer saw these choices as chores or restrictions. They had become part of his life, simple pleasures that also happened to protect his mind, his body, and his future. And in that moment, he felt grateful for the small, crunchy gift that walnuts had turned out to be. By now, Arthur Blake's morning blueberry ritual was as much a part of him as the silver in his hair or the well-worn creases around his eyes. What had begun months ago as a simple experiment, just a handful of berries with breakfast, had quietly grown into something deeper, a cornerstone of his daily life. Each morning, he moved through the same gentle rhythm. The kettle whistled softly in the background as he rinsed the berries under cool water, watching the droplets cling to their skins like tiny pearls. Sometimes he sliced a banana to go alongside them. Sometimes he spooned them over thick Greek yogurt with a sprinkle of walnuts. Other days he kept it simple, just blueberries in his favorite porcelain bowl, eaten slowly while sunlight poured across the kitchen table. It wasn't just about the food anymore. This small act had become a reminder, a way of telling himself each day that he mattered, that his health was worth the care. It set the tone for everything that followed. Arthur had learned a lot since that first conversation with Dr. Nathan. He knew now which foods to avoid pairing with blueberries: milk that dulled their antioxidant power, cucumber that quietly stole their vitamin C, pineapple whose acidity sometimes stirred up his stomach. He had discovered the foods that worked in harmony with them: banana, Greek yogurt, walnuts, creating combinations that fueled his body and sharpened his mind. He'd seen the benefits in ways that were both subtle and significant. His memory felt steadier, his energy lasted longer into the day. His eyes seemed clearer, his mood calmer. Even small physical tasks, carrying grocery bags, tending to the garden, felt easier. Emily noticed too. "You're looking good these days, Dad," she would say. "You just seem more alive." But perhaps the most important change was in how Arthur saw himself. In the past, he might have shrugged off the idea of making small, deliberate changes. He would have assumed that health was mostly a matter of luck or genetics. Now he understood that even modest choices, repeated consistently, could ripple through every part of his life. The blueberry ritual had taught him patience. It had taught him to pay attention, not just to what he ate, but to how it made him feel. And it had shown him that caring for his body could be a quiet pleasure, not a burden. One crisp autumn morning, Arthur invited Margaret and a few friends from the community center over for breakfast. The table was laid with simple, colorful dishes: oatmeal with blueberries and banana, parfaits layered with yogurt and walnuts, a bowl of fresh berries in the center. As they ate, the conversation flowed easily: stories from the past, gentle teasing, plans for the week ahead. At one point, Margaret smiled at him across the table. "Arthur, you've started a bit of a trend. Half the folks at the center are eating blueberries now because of you." Arthur chuckled. "Well, if it keeps us all on our feet and out of trouble, I'll call that a win." Later that day, as he washed the breakfast dishes, Arthur thought about what she'd said. He hadn't set out to influence anyone, but maybe that was the quiet power of living well. You became an example without even meaning to. That evening, he sat on the porch with Emily, watching the last light fade over the trees. She asked him what had surprised him most about this whole journey. Arthur thought for a moment, then said, "That something so small could change so much. A handful of berries, that's all it took to start." Emily smiled. "And now?" "And now," he said, "I can't imagine starting my day without them. Not because they're magic, but because they remind me every single morning that I'm still in charge of how I live these years." The next morning, Arthur moved through his familiar routine once more. He placed the berries in his bowl, their deep blue skins catching the early sunlight. As he took the first bite, he felt the quiet reassurance of a habit well kept, a promise honored. In that moment, he knew this was more than a breakfast. It was his way of choosing every day to live with clarity, with strength, and with the quiet confidence that the years ahead could still be vibrant, joyful, and deeply his own. And so the ritual continued, small, simple, and, in its own way, powerful enough to shape the rest of his life. Arthur Blake's story began with a simple bowl of blueberries, chosen on a quiet morning out of curiosity and hope. What started as a small step to protect his memory became the thread that wove together so many changes in his life. He learned how those little berries could sharpen his mind, steady his blood sugar, protect his vision, strengthen his heart, and even keep his skin looking healthy. Along the way, he discovered that not all foods were friendly companions. Milk, cucumber, and pineapple needed to be kept at a respectful distance if he wanted his blueberries to work their magic. But he also found their perfect partners: banana for steady energy, Greek yogurt for strong muscles, walnuts for a sharp mind. These weren't just recipes, they became rituals that made him feel more alive, more in control, and more connected to his own well-being. It wasn't only his health that changed. Arthur's relationship with himself deepened. He began to see that small, mindful choices, repeated day after day, could transform not just his body, but his confidence and his outlook on life. His morning blueberry ritual became more than breakfast. It became a quiet act of self-respect, a way of saying, "I'm still here, and I'm still choosing how I live these years." Arthur's journey is proof that it's never too late to start. Even the smallest habits, when chosen with care, can ripple through your days and shape the years ahead. So tomorrow morning, as the sun rises, choose one small thing that serves your health. Do it with intention. Do it every day. And let it be the start of your own story of strength, clarity, and joy in the years to come.